Macri out. That's what hundreds of Argentinians are demanding after the president lost against his rival Alberto Fernandez in a primary vote last week. Sensing Fernandez's victory, investors are dumping Argentinian stocks, bonds and currency. In his campaign, Fernandez has pledged to rein in the private sector.
With Macri's latest devaluation, that meant a loss of between 23 and 25% of purchasing power. It ended up hitting families and driving them into poverty, in many cases, even destitution.
The stock markets plunged 38% since the election and the resignation of Economy Minister Nicolás Duhovne, which followed shortly after. The peso fell nearly 18% last week, but recovered to around 55 against the dollar. Dollar auctions by the central bank and the economy ministry have helped stabilize the currency. Many Argentinians have been rushing to supermarkets before prices go up further. Inflation already stands at 55%, or twice the rate when Macri took office. In response to falling support, he enacted emergency measures last week, including cuts in food and personal income taxes. His new economy minister, Hernán Lacunza, says stabilizing the battered peso will be his top priority, while pledging to meet commitments made to the International Monetary Fund.
I contacted the authorities of the international organization by telephone. In the coming days, they will be making a visit to Argentina to measure the progress on the goals established in the IMF loan deal.
Opposition leader Fernandez has been critical of the $57 billion deal the government struck with the IMF last year because of the austerity measures it imposed. Many people in Argentina say that deal is the cause of the crisis, and he's promised to rework it if elected.
There is a lot of misery. That is why today we want to break with the International Monetary Fund to use the resources for foreign debt on workers' salaries, health and education. There's also dismissals and suspensions, ending tariffs and a series of issues and emergency programs to consider, so that workers do not pay for the crisis, but rather those who caused it.
Ahead of the presidential election in October, Fernandez appears the frontrunner with an economic agenda that's resonating with voters. But he still needs to win over investors to turn the economy around. Sibel Karkus, TRT World.
And Jorge Piedrahita joins us live now from New York. He's the CEO of macro advisory firm Gear Capital Partners. Welcome back to Money Talks, Jorge. Now, as we heard, this massive sell-off in Argentinian assets began when President Mauricio Macri lost that primary election. Why are investors so concerned by the prospect of a victory by the left-wing candidate Alberto Fernandez?
First of all, thank you very much for having me at your program. What is going on is that investors, when they look at the prospect of another administration from the Peronist Party, and in particular linked to the Kirchnerismo, that is Mrs. Cristina Kirchner, who, as you know, is going as vice president, when they look at that prospect, they remember some of the worst times they had dealing with that administration, which was at some point a very hard restructuring, where the haircut was extremely large on the debt back in 2005. Then you had some of the saga with the holdouts. You had capital controls. You had some lack of institutionality, including things like the price control process and the price index of Argentina not working properly and so on. So they look into that situation and they see that Macri over the last few years has increased the debt of Argentina significantly, so that there is a question on whether or not the debt of Argentina is sustainable, and if it is not, then what would a future negotiation with the incoming government be? And they put all that together and say, well, that is difficult, that is hard, investors will be punished, and that basically prompted the sell-off in the markets, which has been brutal in bonds and in stocks.
That's right. The stock market all but crashed in the wake of President Macri's loss at that election. The peso plunged even further. Is the worst of this sell-off over?
It is very difficult to say, simply because the market hates uncertainty, And at this point, you have a lot of uncertainty in Argentina. Who will likely be the next president, that is Mr. Fernandez, is not saying much about what his policies are going to be. We still have about 2 months until we have the election. And we have a little bit longer until the transition to the new government. So we have a relatively long period of uncertainty. So markets are not going to react positively until that uncertainty is out of the way. Now, I personally think that Mr. Fernandez may not be as bad as the market thinks, simply because if you look at his career and the positions he has taken over time and so on, he's not such a radical person, but there is no benefit for him to come out and calm the economic situation, because that will only help President Macri to gather more votes, and he wants to win the election. So in the meantime, he will keep the uncertainty as it is, but I do think that this can create a good opportunity to invest in Argentina assets really on the cheap side.
Interesting. Now, this primary election result shows that most Argentinians are clearly angry with the austerity measures that Mauricio Macri has put in place, measures that were really dictated by this IMF bailout that he accepted. Do you believe then that they should review this IMF agreement, or does Argentina need it?
On the one side, that is, given the amount of money that the IMF have lent Argentina, Argentina and the IMF have no other choice than to work together for the next few years. Definitely the conditions of these programs have to change, because the situation in the ground has changed, and I think it only makes sense to have a different kind of arrangement. That is going to happen probably early next year. In the meantime, what you have is the IMF will review Argentina's performance over the last few months, and will need to approve whether or not they send $5.8 billion to the government of Argentina. I would state that it is very likely that they will send that money, first of all, because so far Argentina, when you look at it over the last few months, has been doing everything that they have been asked for the most part. And second, because the IMF does not want to be viewed as the one that exacerbates a crisis. Yes. So they don't want to take a political position. But just to be clear about your question, definitely the agreement with the IMF is going to be renegotiated next year.
Okay, Jorge Piedrahita, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you for your analysis as always.